James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State, How Certain Schemes to Improve the Human Condition Have Failed, 1998, is a seminal work in political science, sociology, and anthropology that explores the limitations and dangers of state-led social engineering. Scott, a political scientist and anthropologist, investigates the ways in which states attempt to make societies legible in order to implement policies, and how this drive often produces catastrophic failures. The book is both a critique of centralized authority and a reflection on the complex interplay between local knowledge and bureaucratic rationality. Scott's analysis draws on history, economics, anthropology, and political theory, making his argument multidimensional and influential across multiple disciplines. Core argument: the problem of legibility. At the heart of Scott's work is the concept of legibility. By legibility, Scott refers to the state's attempt to simplify and standardize complex social practices in order to measure, monitor, and control them. Legibility is necessary for governance. States need to know how many people live in a region, what crops are being grown, what property is owned, and how resources are distributed. However, achieving legibility requires the state to impose standardizations, such as cadastral surveys, standardized weights and measures, or population registries. While these measures make society easier to govern, they often obscure the rich, local, and practical knowledge that underpins human social and economic life. Scott contrasts local knowledge, practical, context-dependent, often tacit information that communities develop over generations, with the high modernist schemes of centralized bureaucracies. Local knowledge is adaptive and responsive to environmental and social realities. High modernist planning, by contrast, assumes that the state can design and impose large-scale schemes from above, relying on simplified models of society. The tension between these two forms of knowledge is central to Scott's analysis. High modernism and its dangers. Scott identifies high modernism as an ideology characterized by an unshakable confidence in scientific and technical progress, a belief in the superiority of rational planning, and a disregard for local, practical knowledge. High modernist planners believe that social and natural phenomena can be reduced to measurable variables, manipulated, and optimized. While such confidence can drive technological progress, Scott argues that it can be dangerously hubristic when applied to social systems. He illustrates the perils of high modernism with a series of historical case studies in which state-imposed schemes failed catastrophically. 1. Soviet collectivization and the Great Leap Forward. The collectivization of agriculture in the Soviet Union and Maoist China's Great Leap Forward exemplify the failure of high modernist planning. States attempted to reorganize agricultural production on a massive scale, relying on simplified models of output and standardization. These projects ignored local knowledge of soil, climate, and farming techniques, leading to widespread famine, economic collapse, and millions of deaths. Number 2, urban planning in Brazil and Africa. Scott examines planned cities such as Brasilia in Brazil, which were designed to reflect an abstract vision of order and functionality. Planners often ignored the social habits and daily needs of ordinary residents. Similarly, colonial and post-colonial urban planning in Africa frequently imposed rationalized grids on cities without accounting for local social structures, informal economies, or customary land practices. 3. Standardization of agriculture in Prussia and Tanzania. In the 18th and 19th centuries, Prussia introduced cadastral surveys and standardized plots of land, and in the 20th century, Tanzania attempted a villagization program. These policies aimed to increase efficiency, taxation, and control, but disrupted existing agricultural practices, often reducing productivity and resilience. These examples demonstrate a recurring pattern: the state's attempt to impose simplified, legible models onto complex social realities often produces unintended consequences, sometimes disastrous. Scott emphasizes that these failures are not merely accidents of poor execution. They are systematic, rooted in the mismatch between local knowledge and centralized planning. Simplification, standardization, and compliance. Scott identifies 3 key mechanisms through which high modernist schemes operate. 1. Simplification. To make society legible, the state reduces complex social realities to standardized units, maps, or measurements. For example, forests may be classified by tree species, farmland by plot size, or populations by ethnic category. While simplification facilitates governance, it erases nuanced local distinctions that are essential for practical decision making. 2. Standardization. Standardization involves imposing uniform rules, procedures, or infrastructure. Standardized roads, agricultural practices, and administrative forms make administration easier, but can disrupt local practices that evolved in response to specific environmental or cultural conditions. 3. Authoritarian implementation. Scott argues that high modernist schemes often require coercion or the suppression of dissent. Voluntary compliance is insufficient when policies challenge deeply ingrained social norms or local expertise. Authoritarian enforcement magnifies the risks of failure as it suppresses feedback from the very communities whose knowledge is being ignored. Resistance and the value of local knowledge. Scott's work is notable not only for its critique of the state, but also for its affirmation of local knowledge, which he terms meti, borrowing from the Greek concept of practical, experiential knowledge. Metis encompasses skills, heuristics, and tacit understandings that allow communities to navigate uncertainty, adapt to local conditions, and sustain livelihoods. Unlike abstract, codified knowledge, Metis is decentralized, context-specific, and often invisible to outsiders. Local knowledge is resilient precisely because it is adaptive. For instance, farmers in pre-modern societies developed crop rotation, soil management, and water control practices based on intimate knowledge of local ecosystems. Similarly, in formal economies, customary law and social networks function effectively because they are grounded in lived experience. Scott stresses that ignoring metis leads to brittle, fragile systems that can collapse under unforeseen stress. Implications for development and governance. Seeing Like a State has far-reaching implications for development, public policy, and governance. 1. Caution in social engineering. Policymakers should recognize the limits of centralized planning and avoid assuming that abstract models can fully capture social complexity. Scott advocates humility in governance and a respect for local expertise. 2. Participatory approaches. Engaging communities in the design and implementation of policies can harness local knowledge, improve outcomes, and reduce resistance. Decentralized, iterative approaches are often more effective than top-down mandates. 3. Recognition of complexity. Human societies are complex adaptive systems. Attempts to impose rigid order often create fragility. Planners should account for diversity, feedback loops, and the non-linear nature of social processes. 4. Critique of modernist ideologies. Scott's analysis is a cautionary tale against uncritical faith in scientific rationality and technological solutions. While innovation is valuable, it cannot substitute for the nuanced understanding embedded in local practices. Conclusion. James C. Scott's Seeing Like a State is a profound critique of the limits of state power and the hazards of top-down social engineering. Through historical case studies, Scott demonstrates that high modernist schemes, driven by an overconfidence in scientific planning and centralized authority, often produce unintended consequences, undermining the very goals they seek to achieve. Central to his argument is the contrast between state-imposed legibility and local, context-sensitive knowledge. Scott's work champions the importance of metis and underscores the value of decentralized, adaptive, and participatory approaches to governance. The book's significance extends beyond political science to development studies, sociology, anthropology, and even urban planning. It challenges policymakers, scholars, and planners to recognize the limits of abstract models, respect local knowledge, and design interventions that work with rather than against the complexity of human societies. Seeing Like a State remains an essential text for anyone interested in understanding the interplay between authority, knowledge, and human resilience in the modern